Welcome to the sneak preview for Connect 2018.1. In Connect 2018.1 we are introducing a new feature, Dynamic Print Control for PostScript printers, which is intended to offer an alternative when a printer definition is not available for a printer or when a custom printer definition is needed. It allows the end user to directly select printer options from a PPD and associate these with media attributes and finishing settings or custom rules. To use this feature, a user will need a suitable PPD and a good understanding of PPDs. Before we take a look at this feature, it's time for a disclaimer. So what we are about to show is a development version of the software. There may be visual and functional problems. The final version may look and behave differently, and not all of the functionality shown may actually make it into the final version. With that out of the way, let's take a look. To show you how to work with Dynamic Print Control, I'm using this template as an example. This template has two media types up here, and inside the section we have some finishing settings, and of course we have configured the sheets. First of all, it's duplex, and then I'm actually using these media types for the media 1 for the first sheet and media 2 for the middle sheet and the last sheet. So we're using all this in one section. And then I have an additional finishing setting for the entire document on the print context. Now, when I want to use Dynamic Print Control, I go into my output presets. And I'm starting with a new output preset. I select a job preset, which I can later on use for metadata. And then in here is where we have to start. So the first thing we have to do is import a PPD to get started. So I have one right here. I need to select it. It's on my disk. The tool will load it. It takes a minute. And then I save it. In my case, I'm overwriting an existing one because I've done this before. So this has effectively created a vanilla printer definition for this printer. When I press next, I get to see our new GUI for Dynamic Print Control, which allows us to assign PPD options to rules that will trigger them. Here on the left I have my rules. The list was pre-populated with media settings and finishing settings from the template. And then finally I get a fixed group of duplex rules that I can configure. When I look at my finishing rules, here on the right I see the properties associated to each one of those. And I also have my media groups, my media settings over here. And I can see the properties for those as well. So let's look at media settings first. Since media can already be controlled completely from the template, the only thing I need to do here is assign actual PPD options to these media attributes. I already have the media from my template, as I just pointed out. If I need to, I can import additional media settings from a different template. So I have one on disk for that. When I hit the little cogwheel there, I can import media settings. I will import them from my sample 2 template. And that gives me 4 additional media settings. When I go over these, then you'll see some of them are quite similar. So the first one here says media type letterhead, no color or weight, and a size of letter. If I go to the first one that I imported just now, its name is different. It says logo, but the type is the same. It's letterhead, and this one does specify a color and a weight, and as size is different. The size is A4. If I look at my media 2, that has type stationary, and if I look at my third media type that I imported, I'll notice that it has the same type. And the other differences are the same. this one specifies a little bit more attributes. So in addition to these two that I've now just looked at, I also have a selection for plain paper from that other template, and I have a media tray, media selection for a separator page, which looks like plain, but it has specifies that it needs to be blue. So having imported all these, I can now start simply assigning the PPD options, which is quite simple. I select the first one and I go down here to the lower right, where I can select my PPD options by pressing a button, and now I get to see all the options that could have something to do with media selection. So I have a media type up here, I have an input slot, but also media weight, a print size, a page size, so there's different options that I can select. And of course I don't have to select all of them, I just have to pick the ones that I think are important at this point. So if I want to drive specific trays, I will pick an input tray. So for instance, I might say, well, my letterhead, I want to pick that from tray 2. So I'm going to assign that, and perhaps that's all I want to do now. So then I can assign all my media types to use a certain tray. So for stationery, I will use a different tray. I just picked 2, so now I'm using 3. This one I might actually want to pick from the same tray as that other one, although their sizes are different. Whether that's a good idea depends of course on your situation, and you might actually even want to choose to print your letter sized paper on A4, for instance. So the other one with stationery I'm also assigning to tray 2, tray 3. And then I have my plain paper, which I want to assign to yet another tray. So I'm picking number 4 for that one. And then obviously my blue page should come from a different tray. So let's use 5 for that one. And then I'm lucky that this printer actually has so many options. I may also want to see if I can actually choose a paper color here. And it does have colored paper, so it only allows me to say white or non-white. So in this case I'll choose non-white for my blue paper. And that basically takes care of all my media types in these 2 templates. What I of course can also have for this output preset, it may print content generated with different templates. So in order to do that, I might want to import from any template I have created, but I can also do something different. Within a group like this, all these attributes are matched from top to bottom. So this is the first one, and then it looks at this one, and then at the second one. So in general, it makes sense to have the most specific ones at the top, and if those don't match, then you can have a more generic rule down in your group. So I'll move these 4 2 positions up, because they're all a lot more specific than these media 1 and media 2s. And in addition, I can add my own rule here. So if I want to have a fallback for any template that I may have forgotten, I can just select add rule, and I will call that default. Of course I can give it my own name, and that will have no setting at all. So anything that doesn't match any of these above, I can go to this rule, and then I get to select what I want to do with that one. So for instance, I think I selected tray 4 for my plain paper, so I could do the same for this default rule. So now we have a set of rules to drive my entire tray selection on our printer. To make sure they work, I will of course have to test them on an actual device. So that's not yet taken care of, and this is just what I think might work on this particular printer based on what's in the printer in the PPD. The next thing I want to configure is my finishing. We got 2 kinds of finishing from the template, so we will look at those first. So we have ring binding, which needs 2 holes on the left side And we have stapling, which needs one staple in the left corner. Let's assume it's the top left. We'll handle the ring binding first. So I go to my printer options again, and I look for anything that could make holes. So in this case that would be punch. And I find two options that are interesting at the bottom. So I select left, and then I add the other rule for the number of holes. You may notice there's a few other punch options here, but if I look at those, they don't even select any actual PostScript down here, so they won't do anything on the printer typically. So here are my holes. The next thing to do for the ring binding is to make sure that if I'm doing subset finishing, that I also turn the setting off again. For this I go back into my PPD options, I look at the same options and I select none, and for the other one also none. So this could take care of ring binding for me. Now I'm going to look at stapling. That wants, as I said, a staple in the top left corner. Well, top it doesn't say. I'm going to assume it says top. And when I look at my stapler options, I see actually a one up left. And it does say left corner, so could be exactly what people expect. So I assign that as well, and then I choose my option for off. If I also want to handle a different kind of stapling, I can add a rule for that as well. So I could add my own rule. Let's select staple. There we go. And just say if it's stapling on the left side with two staples, and then the location is the side and not the corner, then I want to do something else. I'm going to call that staple 2. Well, or better yet, 2 staples. And now I can add a rule for that as well. I already know what to look for. There we go, left to position. And of course I need to be able to turn that off as well. Well, obviously I'm not going to be handling those two finishing settings at the same time, but that's also not what's going to happen, because if finishing is requested, it will either have these settings or these settings, and only one of them is going to match. I can also add a default to handle any kind of staple requests with other attributes than the ones I'm now handling. That will of course result in a setting that may not be what the user actually requested in his settings, but at least he will get a staple somewhere. So I'm calling that default and setting that to staple as well. And well, I could even just, no, I want to match just the staple. And now I can choose what option to do if it's the default. I could do a left corner or a 2 left, or I could do one of the others. So obviously if someone requests 2 on the right, that's not going to match any of my settings. So if I choose something else here, then they won't get what they actually asked for. But in that case, we're just hoping we're doing the right thing. The other solution, of course, would be to add a setting for every option that the printer supports. And that's also quite valid to do in this case. So this gives me 3 rules for stapling, 1 rule for hole punching. And now I will take care of my duplex settings. So I'll close these up and let's see it. Look at these rules. So there's 3 of them. I can't really edit the properties or conditions on these because they're fixed, they're internal to the engine. So the only thing I actually need to do is to add a PPD option. So let me try that for tumble. and this one does have a setting for tumble, so there we go. And then we have another one for duplex, and then we get simplex and we set that to off. And that should take care of my duplex settings. So this is now an example of a printer definition that drives the printer based on a standard functionality of Connect. I have my media, I have my finishing, I have my duplex. But what if I want to do something that is not a standard function of Connect at the moment? Two examples of that are, for instance, switching between grayscale and color printing, or driving an output bin. Well, for that we have an additional feature which is called the custom group. So I can add a new custom group to this list of rules, and I'll start by switching between color and grayscale. So I get a new group down here. I'll close up the other ones so we have a little bit better view, and I can start adding rules to these. And this gives me the rule editor. So instead of matching attributes like with the standard functionality of Connect, now I can base my PPD options or trigger my PPD options on rules. First, I choose when I want to trigger them. So for instance, switching between grayscale and color could be something I want to choose per document. And in my case, I'm going to keep it very simple. So I'm going to say we're going to match metadata, which I have created in my job creation first, in my job preset. And I'll use gender. So if gender contains the word Mr., then I know this is a male. And I'll give this rule the name males prefer gray. So the rule is a little bit descriptive like that. And now I can start looking for a printer option that actually allows me to switch to gray. So I'm guessing that would be something to do with color. And there we go. This is the color mode. And I can pick grayscale. And then I can add another rule, and I'll call that females prefer color. Again, I trigger it at the same moment, so also for documents. And then I add another metadata rule, again on gender, and I'll check if it contains either Mrs. or gender contains Miss. And it now says I have to match all of them, which can't happen. It's either or, so I'll put it on any of the following. So this gives me two rules, and I just need to add the PPD option for the second one. Again, we choose color mode, and this is going to be CMYK. Now, both rules have to match on a metadata field called gender, but what if there is no metadata field called gender in certain cases? Well, in that case, I would still like a rule that at least matches something. So in that case, I can add a default rule, which I will call gender unknown. And here I specify nothing. I just let it trigger at the same level, also for every document. And now I can choose what color to print in that case. So I can pick anything, but I could say, well, let's keep it cheap and let's choose grayscale. So this now is a group for switching between grayscale and color. The other example is output bins. So for instance, I can add another custom group for that, of course. Let's do that first. And let's say that I need to get all documents above a certain size in another output bin because they won't fit on my inserter machine. So I can add a rule for that. And now I'm not going to look at metadata, and I'm going to make the decision for a complete set of documents, assuming that a set is something that goes into a single envelope. And I'm going to choose size, and if the document set has at least 10 sheets, then I want to pick a different output bin. So again, there we have output tray. So since upper says main tray, I'll assume that the exceptions are better off going into the lower tray. I forgot to give it a name. I'll call this oversized. And then I'll add another rule. And I'll call that simply default again. And I'll set that to the same trigger. And this is for anything that is not oversized. So I can just leave out any specific rules. And again, I'm going to select output, and it's going to be the main tray. And as explained before, these rules are evaluated top to bottom. So if it's not oversized, it will automatically become default. So that gives me two examples of how to create custom rules to drive printer options for which we don't have any support in Connect at the moment. There's one more thing I'd like to show you about the rule editor. When I look at the rule editor, I have lots of different options to create rules. So I can decide on size, I can make decisions on metadata. I can also look at the position of my content in the whole job. So for instance, check for if something is the first sheet of a document or a document set. But what if this is not sufficient? What if I need something even more complex? Well, in that case, we have an extra button here that you already might recognize from the template designer, which is expand. When I press expand, my condition becomes a JavaScript. And this JavaScript is similar to what we already have in add additional content. And in here you can use anything that is available in the Weaver Engine's API, JavaScript API. So there's even a little bit more power here under the hood to create complex conditions. And if I now press OK, then this will be permanent. But if I cancel, then I won't have affected the rule the way it was. So now I have all these rules. There's one more thing that may be important, and that's ordering. It can be very important for a printer in what order the PPD options are inserted. All of these options end up at the top of the page or at the start of a page inside the PostScript, which is typically where they belong. But it can matter if we do our output bins first or our color selection first. And in a PPD there's actually some information about that which I can use. If you look at the printer options down here, then we'll notice an order set attribute, which is now set to 50 for this one. If I look at the color and grayscale settings, then we see an order of 12. If I look at my finishing, then both rules have order attribute 50. So if the PPD is correct, the ordering for these two options here is irrelevant. They can appear in either order, so that's fine. But according to the PPD, my color options need to go first because they have a lower order attribute, ordering attribute. Yeah. So to achieve this, I can simply move the group for color to the beginning. So now first these settings will be done, and then my media settings, which are, well, the ones for tray are at 20. and then my finishing, and then my duplex, and then finally my output bins. And if for some reason the printer has problems with this order, specific order, then I could of course reorder my groups a little bit more. And sometimes a certain driving a certain option needs multiple options which could have a different ordering attribute. For instance, if I look at my trays, selecting a tray has order 20. But if I also want to select the media size, I can add something for that. And I have a page size down here. So let's take a look at that one. But when you look at this one, it says 90. So that means it typically should come after all the other groups. But then I'm kind of stuck because tray has to go before my finishing options and page size has to go after. Well, that's why we can create multiple groups of the same type. So I'm going to delete my page size setting here. I will close up my groups just to have a better view, and I'll add another media group at the end. And here I will add my page size. So I add a rule inside, and for this one I don't need to match most of these attributes. The only thing I'm really interested in is size. So I'll call the first one A4, and I'll give that the attribute for A4. And then I'll add another rule, and I'll call that letter. And I'll choose size letter for that one, if I can find it. It's at the top, of course. There we go. So now I have two new rules here for media, and I can put my document size on those. And if the PPD is correct, and I keep saying that because sometimes it isn't, unfortunately, then I will be selecting my paper size at the proper moment in time. So that's why we need to be able to create multiple groups, for instance, for matching media, and the same could apply to finishing, and it's all printer dependent. So this was an overview of the functionality we intend to add to Connect 2018.1 with Dynamic Print Control. We think this greatly increases the control that an end user has over a PostScript printer, and that this will reduce the time spent by support and development on creating custom printer definitions. Although this feature still requires expert knowledge, it allows one to configure the output preset on site where it can be tested on the printer. By the way, printer definitions are not going away and are still a more simple solution when you do have to write one. We expect to further improve on Dynamic Print Control in future versions, so please have a play with this when the pre-release is available. We'll be happy to hear your feedback on how it works on your local printer.